Okay, hi everyone. This is my very first post dialysis video, and I wanted to do it. I'm filming it on my camera. Sorry, I'm filming it on my camera because my camera's better. My phone, because my phone is a lot better than my laptop or anything else I've got really videoing. So yeah, right. So, how did that go yesterday? Not very good. I ended up in pain for, I do 6 hours dialysis. I'm not sure if I've actually said that to you before. I actually do 6 hours dialysis 3 times a week. So, we call it night dialysis. So we stay over at night and then we, we go home the next morning. So we go, let's say if I go on Wednesday night, then I come back on Wednesday morning. It's normally okay. It took me a while to settle down on it, actually. Sleeping away from home 3 times a week. The beds aren't that great. They're hospital beds which are like lined with this plastic so they can clean it easier. So it just makes you really hot. Like my whole family's like that. When we sleep, we kind of overheat. Like our body heat rises and I end up just really sweating. So I end up having to sleep with a fan on my head all the time. When everybody else is freezing, I'm boiling hot. So it's like, oh gosh. So yeah, I do night dialysis. First time on twin needles, as you saw, was excruciating. I was falling asleep at one point and I was literally asleep and someone was trying to speak to me and I had my eye mask on and I wanted to remove it, and without realizing, being right-handed, I reached for my mask with my right hand, but obviously my fistula is in my right hand, so I bumped the fistula, but only for a couple of seconds. Actually, it was really good. Apparently I have a very strong fistula, which is good, but it also caused the issues of the needles moving. And so I ended up in this excruciating pain all the way through. I wouldn't say I'm exaggerating. It wasn't excruciating at first. At first it was just kind of slightly numb. It was like, oh, that's painful. Oh, that hurts. What's going on? But eventually, as it was nearly time for me to come off, I was in so much pain. I just couldn't sleep. I couldn't do anything. Apparently it doesn't get any better. So, and also the fact that they were using the smallest needles, which is size 17. Size 17 is the smallest needles, and I was in that much pain. So I am not looking forward to this. I really ain't. Apart from that, that's it. What can I say really about my dialysis? I've had instances where too much water's been taken off me and I've crashed terribly. I can't remember whether I explained what crashing is. It's when your blood pressure crashes. I've had instances when when I first started dialysis, they took too much water off me and I ended up having cramps in every single muscle in both my legs at the same time. I was screaming the hospital down. I was sweating. I was in so much pain. I couldn't think. I couldn't do anything. It was so painful. They ended up rushing to try and give me some liquids, some saline. The very first time I crashed, I really didn't know what was going on. I had a cramp in my stomach and I wanted to walk it off, thinking, oh, well, why have I got a cramp in my stomach? So I was like, I'll just walk it off. So I went to the loo. I was in hospital at the time. I was in the ward. And I was like, oh, I'll go to the loo or to the toilet. I'm so English now. And it didn't help. I kept trying to stretch my stomach, like pull myself backwards and trying to, stretch it out. But it wasn't working. And then I was like, okay, so I'll go for a walk. And maybe hopefully that will stretch it out. And I went from where the toilet is to just about where the day room is, because there's a day room where patients can sit down and watch TV and stuff, or read books or listen to music. And I got to the day room, which was not super far, but it is a little bit far. And as I got there, like literally my body just did not feel right. I felt hot. I started sweating. My heart was beating completely out of, it was going crazy. I felt weak, and I was like, what the heck is going on? So I sat down on one of the chairs. I got into the day room, sat down on one of the chairs, and I felt dizzy, and I've never really felt dizzy before. And you know when people say, Tef, do you feel dizzy? And they're like, oh, does the room swing? Well, for me, dizziness doesn't mean the room swings. It feels like my brain is swinging. It's like, what the heck is going on? It's like my brain, my center of gravity or whatever is completely out of whack. But the room still looks exactly the same to me. It's just me. I feel like I'm swinging about. So it's just really strange. But yes, I was dizzy. So I sat down on a chair and I put my head in between my legs because it was the only way to stop my head from spinning. And one of the aides, the lead, I call them dinner ladies. One of the aides was like, "Oh, Praise, are you okay?" And I was like, "I don't know what's wrong." And she was like, "Do you want some hot water?" And I said, "Okay, yeah, because I've got a cramp in my tummy. It might help." So she went to get me hot water. By the time she came back, like she didn't even get to give it to me. She looked absolutely freaked out when she saw me, and she was like, "Okay, do you want me to call someone?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think you need to call somebody." By the time she just went, "Day room, Pris," like one of the nurses was walking past and she just went, "What's going on?" And she said, "Oh, Pris, why don't you just sit up?" And I said, "No, I can't sit up because if I do, I feel like I'm going to faint." And she was like, "Just sit up." And luckily, as I was sitting up, a couple of other nurses had arrived. And as I sat up, I literally went backwards I couldn't even stop myself. I literally just went whoosh backwards. And luckily, one of the nurses, whose name's Candy, grabbed my neck and grabbed my head because I would have bashed my head on the chair. But luckily, she grabbed it in time. They grabbed a pillow. The doctor came, literally jumped behind me. And I was literally, my body was freaking out. And it wasn't like, they kept telling me, "Oh, calm down. But my brain wasn't, like, I could see what was going on. I wasn't like, I was scared, but I wasn't like, ah! But my body was freaking out. My hands were shaking. Everything was shaking. My face was sweating. I was clammy. I wasn't breathing correctly. And so, they were like, "What's going on? What's happening?" And what's happening. And they did my sugar levels, and my sugar levels was fine. Because of my size, everyone always thinks I'm diabetic, and I'm not. I'm not diabetic at all, and I never will be. But yeah, so they were like, "It's not her sugar levels." And then they did my blood pressure. My blood pressure was literally on the floor. And they were like, "Oh my gosh, okay." So, they had to bring my bed, because as I said, I was in the ward at the time. They had to bring my bed to the kitchen, which is the day room, put it next to the chairs where I was, to try and get me on it. And in my head, all I was thinking is, I'm too heavy. They cannot lift me. It's not going to happen. So I was mumbling like, "You can't lift me. You can't lift me." And one of the nurses, whose name's Candy, I said, literally was like, "Priscilla, don't worry about it. We do this all the time." I'm like, "No, I'm really heavy. You cannot lift me. I know you can't." So eventually what they did was that they waited for my blood pressure to come back up. And they were like, "Okay, so just drink some water." And I drank some water, I think. And they were like, "Okay." And they were like, can you get yourself over?" And I was like, "Yeah." So I did. I got myself over from the chairs onto the bed. And then I was literally not allowed to move out of bed for like 3 hours. So that was the first time I crashed. Second time I crashed was the cramps in my legs. So dialysis, you have to be really careful about your water intake, but also how much water they take off you. Because if you're not careful and you're not paying attention and you just trust them, not meaning to be rude, but some of them don't really pay that much attention and they'll end up taking too much water off you. And that's extremely dangerous. And you crash or you have really bad cramps. One time I vomited, like literally spewed. I was perfectly fine. I didn't even feel, normally like you feel like when you're going to vomit, you get like white saliva in your mouth. I didn't even get that. Like, I just like felt this pain in my chest. I turned my head for whatever reason. To God be the glory, because I turned my head, because if I hadn't, I probably would have ended up choking. I turned my head without realizing, and I literally spewed. It literally came out like projectile vomiting. It was absolutely, I was shocked, but I was so numb, I couldn't move. There was nothing I could do. I couldn't move. Luckily, actually at the time I had one of my close friends who's a carer who I used to work with. She's been a nurse and stuff, so things like that don't scare her. But I think she was really scared that day, because I was always the strong one in our team, because me and her always used to work together, and I was always the strong one. You know, I did all the heavy lifting, and I did when we had to hoist patients, and you know, I did a lot of the cleaning, because you know, I was good at it, kind of thing. I just, you know, we worked as a team, but I tried to take most of the lifting, because she's older than me, she's got kids, you know, and I was like, well, I've got a lot of strength, so I might as well do it. So her seeing me this week kind of freaked her out a little bit, but she's the one who realized I was vomiting, because I couldn't even say anything, because it was just like, bleh. There it goes. But yeah, so I'm trying to think of other things to talk about dialysis, things that you've got to be careful with. Mainly water, obviously your potassium and your phosphates you have to be careful of. I don't really wait for the hospital or the doctors to tell me whether my potassium is too high or my phosphate is too high. Luckily, every monthly we get our monthly bloods done, and I look, and if I'm not happy about my results, I do something about it. Potassium, I've never really had too much of a problem. My phosphate has always been a problem with me, and they're very worried about that. But luckily, my calcium isn't so bad. Originally, my calcium was very, very bad, but now my calcium is okay, but my phosphate is still very high. It was like 2.7 last time. Literally, I have no idea. But I think, I mean, I'm a cheesehead. I really do love cheese. I don't eat it to the point where I thought that it'd be that bad, but it looks like I'm really going to have to cut down now. What else is there? Ooh, different types of dialysis. Okay, well, I couldn't do peritoneal dialysis because of my weight. So, like, I didn't get a chance to do that. You can do hemodialysis at home in England, which is really cool. If you've got the space, they will do it at home, and the district nurse will come and help you get yourself hooked up. And then they will they'll teach you how to deal with lining it up, and, you know, which is called self-care or shared care. And I'm going to do shared care eventually, so I can learn how the machine works, how to line it up. Some people get up to the point where they can even needle themselves. So I think which is really cool. And they really assist you really well with that, because they were trying to give you more independence, I guess, because being on dialysis, you depend, it's like losing a lot of your freedom. You know, you're pretty much stuck. But yeah, so, what else is there to talk about dialysis? I think that's pretty much it. I mean, you know, you've just got to be careful, pay attention. Oh, my permacath. I've had my permacath for a year and I've not had one infection. I think you need people who need to be more careful at how the nurses clean your permacath, because they're always going, oh, you know, you can have an infection, you can have this, you can have that. But I think it's because a lot of people just trust the nurses. Nurses are human. They will make mistakes and they will forget things. If you don't pay attention to what they're doing when they're looking after something that is so important as your fistula and your permacath, they will skip and they will cut corners, which will cause you to have an infection. I did not have an infection. Why? Because I watched them every single time they did my permacath, every single time they did my, well, obviously they're only just using my fistula, but for my permacath, they, a couple of times that I didn't, is the times that my permacath got pulled out and I had to get a new one put in. So, you know, I use the geo patch that's normally around the wound there for nearly the whole of the year. So I waited for it to really seal up. Now we've stopped using the geo patch. So it's okay. Right, I think that's it. It's been 15 minutes. Ugh, I didn't want to talk so long. But I had quite a few things to say. I hope you have a lovely day. I'm going to be doing another video today, but today that's going to be about kind of my interest in what the things I like, other than dialysis. Bye bye. See you in a minute.